the fight's inspiring, and I'm inspired by knowing that the customers that we sell to do not feel like the existing products are sufficient for them. There's an opportunity for us to come in and to go deliver extreme value for these customers and solve their pain points.
Welcome to Spotlight On, where we examine the technology shaping our world through conversations with the people building it.
Welcome to Spotlight On. I'm Ping Li. I'm your host. I'm here with Alex Bovee, co-founder and CEO of ConductorOne. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Ping. Thanks for having me on.
So, Alex, maybe we can start off telling everyone a little about ConductorOne. You know, what the company does, what the product does.
Yeah, absolutely. So ConductorOne is a access control solution for modern companies. We think of ourselves as being a platform in the identity security space, helping to secure identities, onboarding, offboarding, governance, compliance, and really just be that end-to-end solution to make sure that breaches don't happen for companies and employees get the access they need when they need it, and then companies stay in compliant.
Cool. And we'll talk a little more about the product. But first, before we get there, let's try to go back a little bit, a couple years. You know, I first met you when you were at an Accel portfolio company that was called Lookout in the security space years ago. And then we kind of reconnected when you wanted to start a company. And you called me up, but it was the middle of the pandemic. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know how this is going to work, but we have EIR programs, which are these entrepreneur residence things, as you know. And you're like, well, I'm game for that. I'm like, well, we don't have the in-residence part because it's all virtual. We're all in COVID lockdown.
Residence is your residence.
Residence, your residence, exactly. So, like, take me through why that was. You thought that was a good starting point for you.
I've always felt like I had that entrepreneurial bug. I've always known I wanted to start a company.
Okay.
And when the pandemic happened, I was really developing this idea a little bit for what was eventually ConductorOne, and we were talking about it, but. I really needed the opportunity in the space to build that sort of conviction around the business and the opportunity. Yeah. And that was why the EIR, I guess the entrepreneur in my residence was so interesting and appealing. Was it really just gave me the space to develop that conviction in the business and the opportunity while, I was also pulling together that founding team of obviously Paul and myself.
And do you think this was something that you've wanted to be you said entrepreneur forever, or how much of it was the idea that kind of pulled you into doing it at the time?
I mean, I think there's something remarkable that I feel like really has to happen to truly build like a high growth startup. You have to have a founder who wants to do it, which I think I've just innately always had. I cut lawns when I was a kid. I was very much like kind of that person. And then you have to have a good idea that makes a lot of sense, that can turn into a high growth business, and then the timing has to work out. And kind of when you get those three ingredients, I think that's what really creates an opportunity for a great business. So I would say the ingredient of feeling like an entrepreneur was always there, but the timing and the idea is the piece that also kind of came together at that nexus, and that was the founding of ConductorOne.
And the idea, was this something you were seeing because you had Okta before? ConductorOne's in the identity broader space. Was it something you were seeing with customers? How much did that play a role into the idea?
A lot of it, actually, yeah. So because I was running security products at Okta, but the way that we were thinking about security was very kind of secure the front door, like authentication.
Right.
But when I would talk to CISOs and security teams that had put strong authentication into place, they're worried about, well, do people have the right privileges and permissions, and how do they get the access they need? And so, you'd get what I would call, my background's mostly in product. So in product, you kind of get these whiffs of problems where people will articulate kind of the need for a solution, but in different ways. And so that was just kind of like a whiff of, hey, there's something else here where clearly there's a problem that's not being solved right now as companies go out and they adopt the cloud, and they've got this sprawl of identities where it doesn't feel sufficiently addressed. And I was hearing the early signs of that. The other piece that I was getting some signal on while I was still at Okta was really also just understanding that the market was not well served with existing solutions. You either had a lot of manual processes kind of in place for a lot of mid-market companies, and there's sort of some legacy solutions that were more geared towards large enterprises. And that just, again, is one of those kind of timing and pain point, and the why now, kind of the adoption of cloud, and again, the proliferation of identities and the sprawl of permissions, that really just created this like urgent pain and need where, I feel like there's a big opportunity to solve that.
And so it sounds like a lot of the customer interactions you had at Okta was kind of informative in terms of that initial spark of ideas. And
yeah, absolutely. And there's a little bit of a tie in there too, even to Paul and my story. So Paul and I worked together at my co-founder, Paul, and I worked together at Okta. But we would be out selling his product, Advanced Server Access. And some of the feedback we'd get sometimes from prospects was, we don't log into servers. It's like, oh, what do you do? Well, we do access via AWS's control plane. And so there's switches like that where I realized, oh, there's this whole new pattern and paradigm for managing access, which is much more around the identity and the permissions and the life cycle. And so it was really kind of just a lot of signals like that. Yeah.
And so you brought up Paul. You didn't know Paul before Okta?
I did not. I first got connected with him when we acquired his previous company, Scale FT.
Yeah, and was it one of these things where, like, love at first sight? You saw Paul and you're like, man, I got to start a company with this. You hear those stories, right? Or was it kind of like, hey, you guys stumbled on the same idea every time you went to go see customers and you looked at each other like, hey, we got, like, what was that kind of formation?
There's definitely an element of Paul is the most exceptional technologist I've ever met in my life. And so when I, kind of talking about those ingredients of starting a company, like an idea, timing, team, and like having that entrepreneurial spirit, if you can pull together, get someone on your team and sort of found a company with people who have exceptional skill sets like that, like you always do it. And so it was a little bit, sure, love at first sight.
Yeah.
I guess that's a fair thing to say.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I get it.
But yeah, he's a great guy, exceptional technologist, and I remember thinking if I was ever going to found a company, it'd be with that guy.
Yeah, and like, what are those qualities that you think make co-founders really click, right? Because that's for me magic. When co-founders figure out a way to come together.
I think so much of it is trust, and that's why. I think why Paul and I's relationship worked so well too is we didn't like speed date and then decide to start a company. We actually worked together through some really hard challenges while we were at Okta relaunching his product, and kind of went through those trials and tribulations and understood and saw how each other worked and had an opportunity, I think, to build a lot of trust there. So that's one. I think that's the foundation of any good just relationship in general.
Yeah.
And then I would say really complementary skill sets. So I would, I'm definitely a lot more outbound. Like I don't mind the sales part of things and marketing. And Paul's obviously a great technologist. I think we overlap on product. It's our safe space. We love nerding out on that.
Right.
But that, that's common ground, but very clear sort of delineation of responsibilities and ownership, and then just extreme trust.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting, I'd love to hear how your perspective was, when you were doing the virtual EIR, you were in Florida because you were in obviously the Bay Area with Okta, and then you went to Florida during the COVID period. And after things started opening up, you decided to move to Portland, which is where Paul is from and lives now. Now you both live in Portland. How much, take me through that thought. Was that like, hey, look, co-founders need to be next to each other because there's a lot of sausage making and it's easier to do it all in the same kitchen, or was it that just you wanted to live in Portland?
It was really that. I mean, I never had any desire to live in Portland. Right. We felt a little like nomads when we were in Florida. We didn't really think that was the permanent destination, but we weren't sure what was next.
Right.
So I like to say that I followed Paul up to Portland.
Yeah.
But I part of the reason for that was it was very intentional. It was that, look, I want to be in the same area vicinity as my co-founder, because I think some things like building trust is so much, it's you're making these hard decisions. You're really going through a lot of ups and downs and trials and tribulations. It's so much nicer to be able to say, let's go grab a beer after work and kind of talk about that and work it out. And just, banging out ideas and solving hard problems. there's like a je ne sais quoi of just being in the room together that
Yeah.
you just figure things out faster. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's the mediums with whiteboards and things like that, but it just works better.
Yeah. And what's been the experience of building a company in Portland?
It's been pretty good. I mean, I think in many ways we've created some asymmetric sort of advantages by being there, because there's a little bit of a tech scene in Portland, but it's not as competitive as like the Bay Area, let's say, for talent. So we've been able to really build. We're very EPD centric in Portland right now, so we've been able to build just a phenomenal team there with extremely reasonable office rental rates.
Right.
Like our San Francisco office is probably about a third as nice as our Portland office, but 3 times more expensive.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so it's very cost efficient on things like that.
Right.
But it's also just again, it's nice to be able to really attract great talent, and because we're the coolest game in town.
Yeah.
And, and that feels that's just great.
But when you first started, you're still coming out of COVID. People were very distributed. Your team was actually very distributed, if I remember correctly. I think like 12, 18 months ago, you guys kind of really started making Portland and San Francisco kind of hubs.
That's right.
But what about the culture aspect of that, being in the office? Have you noticed a difference since you've been, or did you feel like the culture was already being built virtually and it's just kind of cemented it, or is it?
It's kind of cemented it. I would say, our culture is really oriented around, so we have a bunch of values, like be the conductor, for example. So it's really around like how we want our team to be. I think the office is really just creating a space for everyone to collaborate more efficiently, have an opportunity, particularly for the younger folks on the team. Like, they just want to be around people. I think the older you get, or longer you get in your career, and if you've got kids and things like that, I think sometimes the social aspect of the office is not outweighed by the commute.
Yeah.
So, we see a little bit of that dynamic. If you've got a family and things like that, maybe you don't, you'd rather have the work from home flexibility, but just creating the space, making it fun. We haven't mandated everyone has to be in the office this many days a week, but we try really hard to hire in those locations. We try, Paul and I are in the office probably 4 days a week just to lead by example and just be there. It's
been an interesting journey in terms of how you kind of brought people back, and it does feel a little different in terms of the ability to accelerate into decision-making, growth, and everything else. Like, and even hiring, I think, has been different too, because people come to the office, they see other people in the office, like, oh, this is the company I'm joining, right?
The energy is so good.
Yeah.
I mean, the energy is so good when you're interviewing candidates in a conference room and they're seeing everyone working, and it's great.
Yeah. So kind of switching a little bit gear, I said we're going to talk about the product now. So I love to, I guess there's 2 parts of this question. One is like, hey, you got this long-term vision. Talk a little about where you see the product in, I don't know, X number of years, 3, 4 years. And then how did you go through the process of figuring out what to do day one?
Yeah.
Because you can't build everything day one, right?
Yep.
So how do you figure that out, and how do you things out?
Oh, absolutely. So our vision and our mission is to secure the workforce. That's what we talk about all the time. And the way that we're doing that is we're building, as I mentioned, an identity security platform that secures access, governs access, makes sure companies are in compliance. That is a very broad set of capabilities and kind of things that you have to do and problems that you have to solve for customers. So in our product, we automate user access reviews. We enable self-service. We enable just-in-time permission escalation. We give you visibility in your identity. So there's a lot of capabilities. Really, our goal during I would say the first sort of year of the company was to explore all of those different kind of entry points and really figure out and hone which ones we wanted to start, which one or ones we wanted to start with. We always knew we were building a compound platform, like a horizontal platform that was going to solve lots of problems, but the entry point was not clear. Like, do you start with access reviews, or do you start with this, or do you start with that? And so there was some discovery there, and it's actually kind of, I look back sometimes on our Series Seed investment deck, And so much the graphic and the vision of the platform with all the boxes on it of what we want to build, the words have changed a little bit, but it's pretty consistent.
Pretty much the same. Yeah,
So what we're doing today, and a lot more of them are filled out and actually built, which is just, it's so inspiring.
That early iteration phase, when you're kind of building, where you're trying to figure out what the product insertion is, what do you think worked for you guys? Because it's clearly starting to really take hold. Like, it's kind of very repeatable now, the insertion. Like, how did you pick up all those boxes on top of that platform? You know, how do you narrow that down? Because I think that's really critical for any startup.
I mean, I think the truth is there's the process of discovery, in my mind, is the process of trying to take someone's money.
Yeah. Okay.
And it is just truly saying, I think this is the pain. I mean, our first product was access reviews, and we literally sold it to a customer based on screenshots and mock-ups and things like that, and like Google slide deck. But that process allowed us to say, someone is interested enough in what we're building here that they're willing to continue the conversation and keep this going. And eventually it turned into our first customer. And I think that that process of discovering the market is just about, you can have hypotheses all day long, but you have to just go try to get someone to pay you to do a thing. And that's pretty much what we did. Yeah.
No, you guys engaged the customers very early on in the journey, which, even in some ways is pre-product. You guys were out there trying to.
Because it's tricky, because you can, there's a lot of conventional wisdom around how you do discovery and things like that.
Product market fit.
Right. Yeah. And sure, you can ask people, about their problems all day long, and they'll tell you about. They may not be willing to pay you to solve them.
Yeah, right.
So it's truly about kind of trying to understand what the most painful things are. And at the end of the day, to me, the market efficiency is the true demonstration of values that someone's willing to exchange money for a problem being solved.
Yeah. And so kind of zooming back out to the kind of the big platform vision. I mean, if you hear the way you articulate the platform, right, like you're talking Okta, you're talking SailPoint. I mean, you're kind of going right at, at least in the case of SailPoint, exactly kind of what they've been doing for, I don't know, 2 decades or so, right? Like, how do you think about that? Is that like, holy crap, like how am I going to compete with someone that's got customers, big balance sheet, a little startup, like is that?
I love it. I mean, to me,
it's kind of crazy if you think about it.
The fight's inspiring, and I'm inspired by knowing that the customers that we sell to do not feel like the existing products are sufficient for them.
Right.
So, yes, big balance sheets, yes, big teams, big companies, all those things are true, but they're still not solving the problem because there's an opportunity for us to come in and to go deliver extreme value for these customers and solve their pain points. And I think there's so much opportunity. We really understood, I think, when we started the company, what was broken about some of those existing solutions. And so we really built into the product day one from a first principle standpoint. Here's the things that must be true about the product we're building, because we want these things to be true 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, because this is how we're going to compete against those really large incumbents.
Yeah, give us examples of something that you think you guys are doing fundamentally that a SailPoint couldn't just do with throwing bodies at.
As an example, user experience, which I know is talked about a lot, but or kind of in generalities, but the reality is staffing up designers on our team early, making sure we cared about the UX, making sure it was beautiful. Those are things that they kind of permeate the entire product now. A better example maybe is time to value.
Right.
This was one thing that we just heard consistently with those existing solutions is extremely long, drawn-out implementations. Gartner just published some statistic that said, I think 50% of IGA deployments are distressed. It's a not-so-secret that usually companies pay anywhere to 2 to 3 times the software costs and services to get them going. To me, those are just anti-patterns.
Yeah.
Companies want things that just work. They want them to be opinionated. They want to be able to flip products on and get value out of them very quickly. And so we built a very opinionated product that was able to get up and live and running very quickly.
When you got funded, it was kind of the pretty good time to raise money.
Yeah,
right? It was
pretty frothy.
It was pretty frothy, right? And therefore, a lot of other companies got funded.
Yep.
Right. So a lot of other startup competitors. How do you think about the competitive landscape that you live in today, and how's that changed now that the funding environment's a little different?
I would say I've evolved my personal opinion on this quite a bit. I think when we first started ConductorOne, I would say I had a unhealthy obsession sometimes over competitors.
Oh,
and I've definitely evolved that a little bit too. I think you need to be competitor and market aware. But if you're too focused on what everyone else is doing, you're not focused on your customers and your product. And you just have to constantly worry about that and worry about what are your customers doing, or what are they asking you to do?
Yeah.
What are you doing with your product? What are you doing with your business? And kind of understand what maybe folks are doing on the periphery, but don't worry about it. Use it as an input into decision making potentially, but don't be obsessed about what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Well, it's one of many inputs.
It's one of many inputs, exactly.
And not over rotating.
Exactly. And it's too easy too sometimes, I think, to look at a competitor, look at someone else doing something and think, well, maybe we should do that too. But you don't have the context on why they did it, if it makes sense, or are they selling to someone different? And so there's so much context around ICP and product and things like that get lost if you lose sight of your customer and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and something you said earlier about starting a company is timing is really important. Is there something that you saw or you are seeing today in the market around identity and broader IGA that you feel like, man, this has to happen now?
Yeah.
Like we can't wait. You can't wait another year or two to start this company. Like what was the things you're seeing in that?
Yeah, the things that we saw, there was a handful of trends. One was just the massive explosion of cloud and infrastructure. So, companies went from maybe using a handful of SaaS in sort of the mid 2010s to over 100 SaaS applications, and they're in 3 different public clouds, and they've got 100 AWS accounts and things like that. So the sheer sprawl of applications, and then when you multiply that by identities and permissions, it really rapidly becomes a non-human scale problem. And when you apply sort of like a security lens to that problem, you realize this is where attackers are going, right? Because in the cloud and in general, identity, there's sort of the I know it's a little cliche, but like identity is the new perimeter. But really what that means fundamentally is how your company will get attacked and how your data will be breached is going to be based on some identity being popped, having too many permissions. Lateral movement is just SSO in the cloud. And so we really saw that as the security frontier was going to evolve. It was going to evolve from just securing the front door to really, how do you think about securing all up identity in your environment? Yeah.
Well, speaking of market timing and what's going on in the space, RSA was last week. It was as it usually is a pretty crazy.
I'm still tired.
Continues to be an important conference, obviously. What were your takeaways from that as it relates to what you guys are doing? Right. I mean, there's a lot of hype around AI and a lot of other things, but what were your takeaways from that?
So I would say 2 big takeaways. I think one is just the validation of kind of security platforms as a trend that's happening. I think a lot of people have sort of predicted that, but I think we are seeing some consolidation around different sort of categories or resource types and sort of security vendors that sort of secure those resource types.
I heard one quote just saying that the CISO, unless you're replacing 2 things, don't buy it.
That sounds right.
If you're going to buy one thing, you better be replacing 2 things.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a very real trend, and I think that speaks to the strategy that we had day one that
Yeah.
And the reason we built this company is we believed the same thing was going to happen to identity.
Right.
And then the second part of that, I think, is maybe a little self-serving, but identity's hot, and that's exciting.
Why is that? Because it's not new, right? Like I was surprised too at RSA, how there's still so much talk around identity, even though I feel like every year you talk about identity. Certain categories, I think you're right, have gotten consolidated quite a bit. The buzz is kind of worn off, but there hasn't been an attack recently, that would have caused that. I mean, there were a bunch last year, right? A little less this year. So is there? We
were having a CISO dinner last night, and everyone was kind of joking around that the problems are always the same problems.
Right.
They just kind of get like a little, people talk about them differently, or new solutions and things like that. And I think the same truism it's for identity. It's like identity has always been the problem. It's just
it's always been the problem.
How we've talked about it and things like that. Yeah. But that being said, I do think there has been a little bit of a shift happening in the last few years that I think both Paul and I predicted and saw, which is identity is increasingly becoming a security concern.
Yeah.
So it used to be that identity was just a
directory.
It was a implementation detail of how IT got people access to things. And what identity's become, because now it's credentials are attached to access, attached to authorization, lifecycle, all these things. Identity is kind of the keys to the kingdom, and so security increasingly has a really big hand in making sure that identity and access is compliant, that you have good governance, that you're securing it. So it's becoming increasingly a security.
Yeah, I think it's becoming an attack surface.
That's right.
Which I think is a big delta from before. I also think, I've talked about this before, the non-human identities is become a problem. Right? That, it's not just, Alex, but all the other things Alex is.
Yeah. All my service accounts, and my OAuth tokens and API keys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's just, making a bigger surface area. So I think we can't go through any podcast without talking about AI.
Yeah, let's do it.
So what AI and identity is there? I mean, is it a lot of AI on everything, or is there actually, you think, a real, both from two ways? From a product perspective, are there things you can use AI for to make identity products better? And two is AI a threat to that identity attack surface we talked about?
Yeah. So I think, so I'm always a little bit skeptical on big trends like that, because you just see marketing kind of sprinkling AI dust all over.
It's good for fundraising.
It's really good for fundraising. We're going to transform immediately into next gen AI identity. So we'll figure it out.
C1.ai.
There you go. There's the kind of the hype and the buzz and that, and then you got to distill it down and say, well, what is AI in its current incantation, or what AI will be in a year or two actually going to be really good at?
Yeah, right.
And given that context, how can you actually apply this to your product to solve a meaningful problem? It is mathematical at some level. Yeah. And at least in our space, you think about AI as being really good at parsing language and making sense of it, and kind of distilling that into a set of instructions, or summarizing things. That's kind of what AI is good at right now with LLMs.
Right.
And there's lots of opportunity to do that, to use those capabilities in the identity governance context, which is sort of some of the capabilities that we've built into our product, like help desk integration, for example, to automate access request creation just based on someone typing something.
Right.
Those are things that allow you to make a really truly magical product experience that solves a customer problem. May not be sprinkling AI dust all over, but it's actually meaningfully solving a real problem.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that plays out just in simple ROI for the customers, right? I mean, the efficiency just goes. It's such a manual process today. The whole thing. So, what about you? You see? Are you seeing a lot of AI-driven attacks on identity-based attacks?
We haven't seen any. We have not seen a bunch. I mean, there's certainly the ones that gotten into the news. I think I would not be surprised to see. I think I wrote a blog post on this maybe about 9 months ago. More of a proliferation of AI making kind of script kidding attack tools better and more efficient. When you think about phishing texts and phishing emails and things like that. Just the ability to, use AI to produce a message that's tailored to a person, maybe based on their LinkedIn profile. Or these are all things that are extremely would be a very manual, like artisanal attack in the past, but is now literally something you could just automate with kind of like off the shelf tooling and an open API key. So I think that's gonna really change. There's always these asymmetries that happen occasionally in security where you really want the attack to be more expensive than it is for you to defend it. Because if it's asymmetric in the other direction, that's where you have a problem. And I think what AI is going to do is it's going to shift that asymmetry a little bit, which is candidly good for companies like us that focus on preventing and making sure that access, things like access is shaped correctly in the first place, and we help people achieve zero standing privilege, because if and when those attacks are successful, you want to make sure they're not going to actually impact your business.
It is an arms race, as you said. As long as you can make it more painful for the attackers on the, on the defense side.
That's the key.
It's a cost equation. So I guess kind of just wrapping up here, I'd love to kind of get your take on two things. One is you kind of went through this journey of last couple of years, building the product, figuring out what works, getting insertion. Now you're in that kind of customer acquisition, scaling. What are the things that you think you really need to nail in this next phase to get to the next level, right? It's like every startup has different phases of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so it always stems from execution, I think. And execution is acquiring new customers while also making your existing customers extremely happy, while also building new products. And you kind of have to hold all three of those things in your head. It's a little bit of a different game when you first get started, because you acquire a handful of customers. Your whole objective in life is to make these 10 people extremely happy with your product, right? But you get to a point where you're scaling and you're like, I got to make all these people happy, and I got to build new stuff, and I got to acquire new ones, and all that really has to work together. So I just think a lot about execution, and how do we move as fast as possible? How do we make quick decisions? How do we make sure the team feels enabled and trusted and has the right ownership they need to be able to go execute well?
Yeah, no, I think it's going from like being focused on one thing, just making the customers love your product, and now figuring out how to make many customers love many products, and kind of figuring out all the different features you need to build across a wide set of customers. And
it's exciting as a founder too, because you see your job changing. My job is changing from working directly on a thing to make it successful, like a product to make it successful, to working on our business to make our business work better, to make the whole company more successful. So, as that scale happens, like your job as a founder really shifts to, you're a lot less like kind of in the individual problem solving mode, and a little bit more like I'm diagnosing the machine and figuring out, okay, what's broken over here with trials? How do we make that better? What's going on over here?
Has that been hard to not be able to be fully hands-on, fully deep, because you have to be multi-threaded now, as you said?
I think it's probably one of the most challenging things as a founder is just constantly changing your altitude. And you have to do it from meeting to meeting sometimes, because sometimes you are in the weeds, and then sometimes you kind of do have to, okay, now we're working on this other thing and I'm flying at like 10,000 feet. So it's it can be challenging.
And if you had to look back now on the last couple of years, anything you would do differently?
The advice I would give to my early founder day, early founder Alex, I would it's been interesting. The journey for me has been one of, I would say, wanting to make the right decisions. And so sometimes taking more time than is necessary to really be analytical about something to make a decision. And what I've found in 98% of the cases is my intuition and my gut was right almost immediately on things. And so my only advice to my early founder self would just be, trust your intuition. You're going to make mistakes. That's okay. But just, make decisions quickly. Most decisions are reversible at some level. So if
Yeah.
you mess it up, like you can always fix it and things like that. But
Yeah.
it's just about getting the at bats, because decision making is like any skill. You get better at it the more you do it, and it's kind of up into the right. You get better at it, and you're more efficient at it, and things like that.
Well, I think you made a lot of the right decisions to get to this point, Alex. So keep it up. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Ping. I really appreciate it.